Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are taking a look at shapeshifting in POE 2, which will bring with it a host of new build options. So without further ado, today what we're going to do is chat all about the shapeshifting details that we know, the mechanics, as well as the potential for various builds and all of the excitement that follows from the weekend of Exilecon, the first ever convention hosted by Grinding Gear Games, focused on Path of Exile. And of course, we got all kinds of announcements from it. We've got all sorts of discussion that we're going to have right here on our YouTube channel throughout the rest of this week, but we are starting off with this discussion on shapeshifting because literally I was able to find a post dating all the way back to 2011 on the POE forums that was requesting shapeshifting. And so this is one of the longest, most requested features in all of POE history, and it is coming with the release of POE 2. So those of you that are veterans of the channel, of course, welcome back. Those of you that are new, you can like, subscribe, and ding the bell for more videos just like this one. If at any point in time you would like to jump ahead or revisit any of the discussion points that we chat about today, there are timestamps that are placed directly above my slightly shapeshifting bald forehead. And then, of course, all of the links and informational videos relating to Exilecon and the quotes from Exilecon are, of course, linked down below in the video description should you want to fact check me or just are interested in listening to more discussion about shapeshifting in POE 2. So, with all of that said, let's jump right into the discussion about all of these new shapeshifting options that we've got coming in POE 2. First off, key mechanics of shapeshifting. So there were a couple of things that were going on, at least throughout the course of Exilecon. Whenever shapeshifting was brought up, a couple of key points were mentioned. First off, the very first thing that Chris and Jonathan, when displaying shapeshifting for the live audience there at Exilecon and the literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that were watching across the world, was that shapeshifting had to be seamless. And they demonstrated it will be seamless. At a single click, the click of a single button, you go from your regular human form character into the shape of whatever it is that you are shapeshifting into. These shapeshifting skills are generally using melee skills. So, for instance, the example that they showed at Exilecon during the extended gameplay trailer with Jonathan playing and Chris commentating was that you could have your bow equipment still on your character, and when you swapped or shapeshifted into the wolf form that was on display there, you would then use melee attack skills that are still gems based off of skill gems that you'd regularly be able to use with melee weapons. So in other words, to put it simply, you don't have to swap out your entire equipment if you want to go from playing a ranged character to a melee character. Or, for instance, let's say you need to be more tanky for a particular fight, or you need to kite or do more range damage for a particular fight. You can do that at the seamless change of a single click from melee attack form, where you're scaling up your melee gems, or you can go ranged, at which point you're back in human form. The interaction and the seamlessness between these two jumping points was incredibly impressive, especially when compared with several other games out there that feature shapeshifting. Maybe there's a slight delay or there's a slight animation cooldown. No, everything looked seamless as it was demonstrated presently for shapeshifting. The third mechanic is that each shapeshift form correlates to a weapon base. So, for instance, the werewolf that was on display there at Exilecon with the extended gameplay footage of POE 2 was showing that werewolf actually will correlate to a weapon base like claws. So, in other words, the melee attacks that you're going to want to use while you are shapeshifted into that form will be skills, gems, that correlate to claws while you're in werewolf form. Whereas, let's say you're in another form and you will, I don't know, maybe potentially correlate to a sword or to an axe or towards a mace. So each of the different shapeshifting forms will correlate to a weapon base. But remember, you don't have to actually be using that item type when you shapeshift in order to then take advantage of and use those particular skills. All you'll have to do is click one button and boom, you go from whatever it is that your character is normally, maybe even a spellcaster, and you'll shapeshift into this melee creature like a werewolf, which will be awesome. Fourthly, the fourth key mechanic is that shapeshifting form prevents spell usage and will scale attack gems like a version of spells. So the way how spells oftentimes scale their damage is, yes, sure, there's weapons and there's of course passive nodes, and there's all sorts of different ways to scale up your spell damage. But in general, and those of you that are new, of course, know this because you've probably watched our Getting Started video series. In general, attack gems scale with your weapons, whereas in general, spells scale higher with their damage with the level of the gem that is being used. Yes, of course, attack gems still scale their damage with levels, but spells scale that damage much, much harder with the level of the gem that you are using. Shapeshift forms will do this, but for attacks. Why would you want to do this? Well, one reason would be that maybe you are a character that is truly original or truly outside of the box. It's truly undefined by your class, but it's defined by your creativity, your build ingenuity. And so let's say you're using, I don't know, a dagger and a shield, or let's say you're using a quiver and a bow, and you shapeshift into this massive werewolf. Well, in order for your damage to actually scale, if you're not going to have a second weapon setup, or, you know, go into your item screen and awkwardly swap out, okay, now I want to switch my bow for my sword and put in my axe and go dual wielding. Unless you want to deal with all of that junk, you can simply do this, shapeshift, and all of your attack damage is now going to scale based off of its levels, similar to the way how spells would. This is a brilliant, brilliant mechanical move, in my opinion, that GGG is doing in order to make shapeshifting actually viable as a damage source, not just as a movement ability, which is the fear of many players, that simply shapeshifting will be like a utility skill, right? It won't necessarily be a second form of dealing combat damage, but that it would be a utility skill. This actually guarantees that depending on, again, how all the numbers play out, GGG will be able to go in and say, hey, how do we like the way how the meta is shaping up and how players are using our shapeshifting forms? And if we want to buff the damage, we can do that by buffing the damage on these attack versions of skills as they continue to scale, which I think is just, it's brilliant design, I think. But that's just my opinion, and we all know I'm wrong 99% of the time. All right, so the Beastmaster Ascendancy is one of the ways in which you're going to get access to a whole bunch of different stuff, including shapeshifting buffs. So there's a couple of shapeshifting buffs that we can see right here on the Beastmaster Ascendancy. By the way, spoiler, if you weren't alive or awake at all for any news about POE 2 over the weekend, yes, there are going to be 19 new Ascendancies, not replacing the old Ascendancies, but 19 new Ascendancies that are going to be coming with Path of Exile 2. We'll talk more about that later on in the week with our breakdown and our discussion of all the details of POE 2, but just get very excited because there's a whole bunch of new Ascendancy options that are coming, which means there will be a whole bunch of new builds coming. Anyway, yeah, I've got goosebumps and I'm stoked. Anyway, stay focused with me here. All right, so the Beastmaster Ascendancy. First off, you can go grab Born to be Wild, which grants the Werecat form skill, and it gives 10% more damage while you are shapeshifted. Again, that question of will shapeshifting actually be a viable source of damage dealing? Well, if you want to go with an Ascendancy option that focuses on it, this will give you more damage along with the Werecat skill in and of itself, which is pretty cool that it's combining these two things. More damage while you're shapeshifted, and you get a skill attached to it. If you continue down that Beastmaster side of the tree, you will get Wild Shape. Wild Shape, it's very, very fuzzy on the screenshot, so I'm sorry about that. But Wild Shape reads like this: 100% increased buff effect for shapeshift skills. And then retain the buff effects of your previous shapeshift form. We will discuss more of this in just a moment as we break down all of the various options and build choices that are already forming for the various shapeshifting druids that are out there in the PoE community. But I will simply say this: there's buff effectiveness that's built right into this Ascendancy, which we all know is a great way to scale things. There's, of course, the Pathfinder historically in PoE has been a way to buff the effectiveness of flasks, and that has been a viable option for building entire builds around, just to be a flask-style subclass Ascendancy. And so now we've got this shapeshifting style Ascendancy that will buff the effects of your shapeshifting, which is really, really cool, especially when you start to get into the different types of shapeshifting that we can do and their buff effects that are associated. Speaking of which, we've got some details. So first off, the werewolf skill gem, which was shown off during Exilecon, seems to be focused around giving you a bonus to damage while you are shapeshifted. The werecat, which is available from the Ascendancy, from the Beastmaster Ascendancy that we just chatted about, seems to be focused on high crit chance, which is pretty cool. There will be essentially a crit form of a shapeshifter. And then there is a bear, which during a panel discussion, Jonathan actually said, I'm not sure if we're even supposed to be talking about bear. So we're not quite sure yet. Whenever GGG says something like that, it's like, okay, well, is bear still in the workshop? Like, we're not sure if it's going to be a bear, or is bear in the workshop? Like, yes, it's definitely going to be a bear, and the things associated with the bear are definitely going to be associated with the bear, but we're just not sure if we should talk about it yet, because there still might be changes coming down the road. That being said, the stuff that did come out about bear is that it's going to come from a skill, and it's going to be related to survivability and or tankiness. So, with Wild Shape, the way how it's worded and the way how it was described during the panel Q&A, when you select the Wild Shape Ascendancy option, if you go from human, let's say, to cat form, and then to wolf form, you'll retain the bonus, right? You'll retain both bonuses. You can be in human form with one shapeshifting form of your choice as a bonus, or you can be shapeshifted with two buffs of your choice. In other words, the previous one that you just shapeshifted out of and the one that you are actively in. So let's take, for example, if you're using the werewolf and the werecat from the Ascendancy and from the Wild Shape buff. This means if you cast werecat first and then werewolf, you will have both high damage buff from the werewolf and you'll have the high crit. Conversely, if you want to be a little bit more tanky, whatever that means right now, or a little bit more resistant or survivable, those are some of the words that were used to describe the bear shapeshift, you could essentially go for damage and tankiness, or tankiness and high crit. Or you could simply go for one of these buffs and then go back into your human form. So let's say you're a spellcaster, or let's say you're a ranged character and you don't want to be stuck in a melee shapeshifted character form, but you want to retain the buff. So this is a way to get these buffs while you're shapeshifted. And again, these are kind of like auras in this sense, where you're going to retain a lot of the buff that you previously had, but there's no mana reservation that's required here, which is really, really cool. It's a really ingenuitive way of giving us more options for building our characters and for making unique choices, as we all love to do as we are building and following one another's builds as we play Path of Exile. Okay, we've also got confirmed pets and companions that are also in association with this Beastmaster Ascendancy. So not only are we going to have shapeshifting, but we're also going to have some companions and some pets along the way. So if you wanted to go full-on animal army or full-on animal form, you and an animal companion can go tackle all there is to see in Ray class, and that's all associated with the Beastmaster Ascendancy class. So confirmed on that tree, we've got the lion, which grants you some more survivability, the panther, which grants you some sort of stealth, maybe some sort of phasing, the cheetah, which is associated with speed or swiftness, and then the cat, which is actually, again, a cat that grants you basically some sort of effect similar to the aspect of the cat. That was the description that was used on stage. It doesn't mean that you'll have aspect of the cat, but that we'll have something similar to it while we've got our pet companion close by towards us. The way how it's worded on the Beastmaster Ascendancy is you have wildcat aspect, which seems to be different than aspect of the cat. Who knows? It could just be a wording thing where they need to work out that wording and it's inconsistent at the moment, and eventually it will be inconsistent when POE 2 comes out. But for the moment, this is what we've got, and so this is what we can work with and speculate along the lines of. Well, that's what we know so far about shapeshifting in POE 2. What are your thoughts? I would love to hear your own ideas and your own reactions to shapeshifting in POE 2. The audible screams and excitement from the crowd at Exilecon, and I've got to admit, the audible screams, for those of you watching the stream, I'm so sorry, but the audible screams even from me watching when Jonathan shapeshifted from a ranger into a werewolf with the seamless one click and then took on monsters around him. That was pretty awesome. So that's my thoughts on it. But do you like what you've been shown thus far about shapeshifting in PoE 2? Does it get you excited? Does it get you frustrated or maybe curious about other implementations and maybe the viableness of it? Because we saw it relatively early game. Is this maybe potentially going to be something that brings up questions for you about how viable this will be taking shapeshifting all throughout the course of the game? Do you maybe have suggestions or ideas for the implementation of shapeshifting? Do you have other games that have inspired your own gameplay style and your own desires to see shapeshifting come into Path of Exile? Drop us a comment, let us know down below. And of course, I hope that Path of Exile 2 and the 3-Point Line League are the leagues where a Mirror of Calandra will drop for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.